I'm very pleased to introduce a couple of presenters tonight who are actually colleagues of mine. But just before I do, I just want to go through one or two little reminders. Um, for those of you who are used to joining our webinars each autumn and winter season, you'll know that we record them and they're all available online through the website. If you go to the resources section and then look under the YRN webinars pull down, there's also a link in there that'll take you directly to our YouTube channel where we have everything listed in a channel there. This is what that looks like. So if you're actually linking through to YouTube, you can scroll down and see the list of them, play them from there. In terms of keeping up to date with all our events and what we're up to, there's a number of ways you can do that and also to get involved. So you can sign up for our newsletter, join the chat on the Yorkshire Rewilding Forum. And for those of you who are also managing small rewilding sites across Yorkshire, we also have the YRN Small Scale Rewilders Group. Just a little note about our next event, which is coming up in mid-November on the 15th, Saturday the 15th of November near Ripon in North Yorkshire. This is a hedge laying session. So if you actually go to the event section on the website, you'll be able to scroll down and see it listed there, and that'll take you through to the link to booking a place on our Eventbrite service. In terms of how you can support us, we obviously put on a number of events throughout the year. Maybe many of you have enjoyed some of the summer site visits this year, and certainly the webinars. We are entirely volunteer run as a charity, so there are a number of different ways you can volunteer to support us. The easiest is through a small donation, where if you go to the support us part of the website, you'll be able to click through to a donate page there. There's also the SMS text way of doing it, which is to text YRN to 70450 and then a donation amount. There's also the Wild 100 Club, which are people who are willing to support us a little bit further, and this helps towards our admin costs each year. Again, that's accessible through the website. And tonight, as we go, if you have any questions that you'd like to consider being discussed at the end, if you use the Q&A section of the Zoom menu along the bottom, my colleague Jeff is going to facilitate the Q&A once our presenters have finished tonight. So I'm very pleased to introduce the two presenters tonight who I have the absolute privilege of actually working with in my day job. Ella Milne is from Rewilding project development company EcoSulis, and Sophie Jones is from Credit Nature, and together they're going to talk about how technology is revolutionising rewilding. Ella has a background in zoology, has worked extensively with technology in nature restoration projects, and Sophie's a quantitative ecologist who specialises in using novel technology to measure and verify the impact of nature recovery projects. So, Ella and Sophie, if you'd like to unmask yourselves, and if you're ready, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. Just share my screen with everyone.
Thanks, John.
Does that come through, everyone?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Ella, as John mentioned. I work in the innovation team at EcoSulis. Been with EcoSulis almost 5 years now, and we're a rewilding consultancy. We were a traditional ecological consultancy for over 30 years, but then we were the first UK consultancy to centre our focus around rewilding, and we specialise in taking technology-empowered science and innovation-based approach to nature restoration. We work across a range of areas from on-the-ground ecosystem restoration, peatland restoration, wetland restoration, but we also do biodiversity monitoring, rewilding advisory services, and management planning as well. And we use various technologies across these different projects, which I'm excited to share some examples of. And then Credit Nature was initially incubated within EcoSulis before they spun out as a separate company. So I'll pass over to Sophie now.
Thanks, Ella. Hi, everyone, I'm Sophie. I work for Credit Nature, as Ella said, that spun out of EcoSulis about, let's say, 3 years ago now. So I've been working between EcoSulis and Credit Nature for the past 4 years. And at Credit Nature, what we're doing is working to develop investable rewilding projects. So how do we scale up rewilding and get the money in we need to do that? So we have a focus on the development of metrics to measure and track rewilding progress, and the monitoring frameworks that are needed to actually feed into those. And a large part of this is looking at how tech can support this. So like Ella, I'm looking forward to sharing some kind of real life examples and case studies of where we're using this tech at the moment. Cool. So as we know, ecosystems are really complex, and by collecting and analysing ecological data from ecosystems, we can start to understand this complexity and apply this knowledge to better nature conservation and restoration. We know that field data underpins ecological theory and helps us deepen our basic understanding of how the natural world works. And by measuring consistently over time, we can track the health of ecosystems, whether they're degrading or recovering. And all of this data can help us make evidence-based management decisions, give us the evidence we need to kind of create these effective environmental policies, and can enable investment into nature to scale beyond grants and kind of donations. And a really powerful example of this is the discovery of the impact of the pesticide DDT on birds of prey. So this was detected by people, going out and collecting this ecological data, performing nest counts, raptor migration counts, and they basically documented the widespread reproductive failure of birds of prey. And by linking this to DDT, there were then widespread changes to management and environmental policy about the use of DDT in many countries. So it just shows the positive effect that this data can have.
So traditional ecological monitoring is obviously incredibly important, but on its own, it has some obvious limitations. It can be very slow and costly, and sometimes struggles to deliver the accuracy and coverage that we need. Field surveys rely heavily on skilled people, which naturally will limit how much area we can cover and how often we can monitor it. And there's also spatial and temporal constraints as well. So surveys often provide just snapshots of ecosystems rather than that continuous data and that continuous information. Then you've got observer bias that can creep in, since different people may record things differently, and also human presence can disturb wildlife and sometimes influence the behaviours that we're trying to study. So data management is tricky too. Manually collecting data often comes in different formats, and it can make it hard to integrate and analyse at scale. And also some areas are particularly remote and rugged landscapes and difficult or almost impossible to access for people. So this is where technology comes in, but the goal isn't really to replace traditional surveys. We can't, technology is good, but not that good. And traditional surveys remain critical for the ground truthing and the detailed ecological insight, but the aim of the technology is to complement the surveys that we already do.
So given the huge challenges that we currently face in terms of biodiversity and the climate crises, we really have a clear need for collecting this ecological data now more than ever. And with the challenges of traditional monitoring methods that we've just heard, technology can present a huge opportunity to enable us to collect, analyse and understand ecological data at the speed we need to address these problems. Specifically today, we're going to talk about kind of 4 aspects of technology, which are revolutionising how we understand nature. And so we'll explore how tech enables us to collect insights across large landscape scales and continuously. We'll also explore how tech can extend our senses to detect patterns in nature that we've never really been able to see before. And lastly, we'll dive into the world of AI and automation to understand how we can build efficiencies into data analysis and create actionable data.
So the first aspect is landscape scale monitoring, and at a landscape scale, technology allows us to observe and measure ecosystems across really large areas, and something that would be just impossible with just field surveys. So remote sensing lets us map habitats across entire landscapes using satellites, giving us a bigger picture of view of vegetation, land cover, and ecosystem change. Then we can use drones as well for rapid, high resolution surveys, and they can complement kind of remote sensing, capturing more detailed imagery of specific areas and features, and LiDAR as well, which gives us precise kind of 3D models of the surface, vegetation, and terrain. And together, these tools provide a really powerful toolkit for monitoring, for predictive modeling and scenario planning, and guiding rewilding projects at a landscape scale. So LiDAR, I mentioned, is light detection and ranging, and it's an airborne mapping technology that uses lasers to measure the height and the structure of the landscape below. And it can give us two kinds of models, one showing just the bare terrain, and another that includes all the surface features like trees and vegetation. And at Ecosylus, we use LiDAR to uncover hidden landscape features, you know, where river channels or floodplains once were naturally. And we've also been combining LiDAR data with machine learning to estimate above ground carbon stocks, so essentially measuring how much carbon is stored in vegetation across the landscape. And to do this, we start by collecting training data from field surveys, so things like tree height, trunk diameter, and tree species. And then we can take the LiDAR data, which provides this incredibly detailed 3D model of the terrain and the vegetation. And we can use image processing techniques to identify the edges of the tree canopies in the LiDAR data and map kind of individual tree crowns. And then from there, we can calculate a set of predictive variables based on the canopy size and structure. And then finally, we would run these through the random forest regression model, which is a type of machine learning algorithm, and it estimates the biomass and carbon of each tree. And then you get this result of a detailed map or a raster layer where each cell shows the estimated above ground carbon at that location, from light to dark shows the amount of carbon stored. So we've used this approach in several landscape scale recovery projects, and it helps us to quantify carbon storage and also track how rewilding efforts are restoring the landscape over time. Another landscape scale monitoring approach is natural capital mapping. It's a technology-driven approach that allows us to map and quantify the value of ecosystems, including the services that they provide, such as carbon storage, as I've mentioned, flood mitigation, and habitats for wildlife. So by combining satellite imagery, drones, GIS, and computation modeling, we can create these high-resolution maps that reveal where restoration or conservation actions might have the greatest impact. So, for example, in Nottingham, we partnered with a satellite mapping company called For Earth Intelligence to map urban habitats and ecosystem services. So the data from satellite and drone surveys was integrated into models to then identify areas where interventions like tree planting and wetland creation would deliver the highest ecological and social benefits. So these maps provide councils and local communities with kind of the evidence-based guidance for planning and monitoring urban nature recovery projects.
And our last example of kind of large landscape scale monitoring is through the use of drones, which are doing many things, but are transforming how we can kind of track large mammal populations. So depending on the size of the site and the number of individuals, drones can be used to perform census counts of species, so identifying every single species and counting it, or kind of estimating abundance. And it can be really important to track the size of large mammal populations. So for example, with deer, like we can see here, these can often cause overgrazing in the UK and can simplify ecosystems and stunt rewilding progress. And often a strategy in rewilding projects will be to manage the deer populations for this reason. But to be able to make decisions about their management, you need to be able to track their populations. And traditionally, this could be really resource and time intensive, so lots of people on the ground over large areas. But by deploying drones and working with those on the ground to understand where the deer go, and maybe employing techniques on the ground as well, such as flushing the deer out of maybe forested areas, we can collect really good repeatable data year on year and track population estimates and even look at how deer are using the site over time so we can make those management decisions about deer on site. So that brings us on to our second core pillar, which is continuous monitoring. So technology allows for constant and real-time observations of ecosystems, which allows us to overcome some of the temporal restrictions that are inherent to traditional monitoring. So, for example, you might not send people out to survey in the middle of the night, or people aren't going to be going out every single day of the year, and so it's likely that you're going to miss some of the species that you might only see at certain times of the day, or that might only be passing through, for instance. But being able to gather these insights is really key to helping us guide and measure rewilding success over time. So acoustic monitoring is one really powerful way of continuously monitoring a site. This just basically means that we deploy audio recorders secured to trees or posts, and they're then left to record the surrounding sounds for weeks or months at a time, depending on your kind of recording frequency. And what's really exciting about this is that you can capture the entire soundscape. It ensures that you can capture things like nocturnal or elusive species, and from the data you can derive multiple indices, so lots of different information from one data set. And this just shows on a small site in Scotland, where we deployed 5 acoustic sensors, the red dots there. They were deployed for 12 days, and they were put out tactically to cover a representative range of habitats, as well as obviously taking into consideration things like accessibility for those putting the equipment out. And the aim of this was to get a list of bird species present on the site at that point in time. And so after 12 days, we removed the microchips from the detectors and replaced them so that the surveys could be repeated and the data was sent for analysis. And basically what that means is that we classify that raw audio data using machine learning models and some manual verification to produce that final list of bird species from the calls that have been detected. And what's really cool is that the acoustics picked up species like whimbrel, which was a migrant on the site, swift, which are in really low numbers actually in this area, and tawny owl, which is nocturnal. And this just evidences the power of acoustics as an approach for picking up these species which may have otherwise been missed. However, it did miss some of the less vocal species like cormorant and gannet, and so we kind of landed on the opinion that it's often best to take a combined human and acoustic approach where possible, to be able to sample all of these species.
At Ecosulis, we're also using bioacoustics for bird monitoring, and we carried out bird acoustic monitoring for a project on the River Ada, which was 8 weeks of surveys across 4 seasons, so about 2 weeks in each season. And we captured more than 435,000 bird calls from 113 species, which is a huge amount of data for a relatively short period. But interestingly, similar to what Sophie found, 26% of these species were only detected through bioacoustics, while 27% of species observed visually were not actually detected acoustically. So this shows that even though bioacoustics are a really incredibly powerful tool, it does work best in combination with traditional survey methods. And one of the real strengths of bioacoustics is its ability to kind of reveal these temporal and spatial patterns that you might not get from a visual survey. For instance, we can track the arrival and departure of migratory species like the cuckoo. You can see in the graph on the bottom, that's the number of calls of the cuckoo by time of day. And also monitor daily activity patterns as well. So you can find out when species like the nightingale are calling at nighttime. And because these devices stay in situ for long periods of time, we can get continuous high resolution records of when and where the bird's active. So by combining bioacoustic technology with traditional surveys, we gain this much more complete picture of bird activity and distribution, which is helping guide habitat management and rewilding projects. Moving on to one of my favorite technologies is virtual fencing, specifically NoFence. NoFence is the world's first virtual fencing system, which was developed in Norway by a goat farmer who wanted to graze mountainous land without the constraints of physical fences. So you may have come across it before, it's quite popular now. But each animal wears a collar which has a GPS, solar power, Bluetooth, and an accelerometer to track the location and the activity of that individual. And then after a short learning period, livestock really pick it up quite quickly, and they reliably stay within these virtual boundaries. If they get close to the virtual boundary, they hear an audio warning, and if they cross the virtual boundary, they get an electric pulse. But often they only need to get the electric pulse once to understand the audio warning. And these virtual boundaries of the fencing can be managed and adjusted through a mobile app or the web portal. And the software allows you to see real-time herd movements. You can look at individual activity. You can also detect kind of potential health issues. You can see where the animals spend their time, where they want to graze. And you're also able to move them between their virtual pastures quite seamlessly. And while it was originally designed for agriculture, NoFence is now being used widely across rewilding projects because it allows us to steer these ecological processes. You know, we can facilitate natural herbivore movements. You can prevent overgrazing. You could corner off and protect sensitive areas. And it's great because it's all without physical fences. So we're also increasing ecological connectivity as well. At Ecosulis, we've trialled NoFence collars on cattle and sheep in restoration sites, and we found it very effective for both management, increasing biodiversity and ecological connectivity, and also for monitoring. So you get huge amounts of GPS data from the collars, and you can overlay that onto habitat maps. So we can start to build up a picture of herd grazing preferences, which is, yeah, really, really cool. So similarly, biologging, so my academic background is actually in biologging technology. And although we aren't directly using biologgers at Ecosulis, there are a lot of cool projects where they are being used in rewilding. So biologgers are small kind of data tags that you attach to animals to record movement, but also behavior and physiology and the environment as well. So they can include a GPS tag, which connects to a satellite, and you would get a location fix every 15 minutes or so, which is kind of quite low resolution. But now there's really cool advances in the technology, and you can integrate loads of different sensors to get really high resolution movement data. So if you add in an accelerometer and a magnetometer, you can reconstruct like fine scale movement and posture and orientation down to like the like 40 data points per second, which is really, really cool. You can also integrate temperature and heart rate sensors, so you can monitor things like physiology and stress, pressure sensors, so you can track diving behavior, like from penguins. And it's got some really cool, amazing applications. So you can monitor migrations, you can look at foraging behavior, animal energy expenditure, and also assessing habitat suitability, and especially for reintroduced species. If you're reintroducing a new species, you need to know you need to know if it's going to survive, or like how it behaves in that area to inform future reintroductions. So there was a relatively recent reintroduction of the red-billed chough in Kent, which was, I think it was Kent Wildlife Trust and Swansea University, and they attached GPS tags, but also I think they incorporated daily diaries, which have accelerometers and magnetometers. So they've managed to build up a really in-depth picture of where the birds are going and how they're behaving, which is helping inform other reintroduction programs. And citizen science apps. So in the last few years, we've really seen an explosion of nature apps or citizen science apps, which you might have on your phone. And they're making full use of all the sensors that we have in a smartphone, like a GPS, an accelerometer, a compass, and now also boosted by artificial intelligence, and by linking mobile devices to cloud computing, social networks, and big data. Our phones have become this surprisingly powerful little scientific tool. And this technology and these apps have removed the barriers to participation. So you don't need to be a trained ecologist now to collect biodiversity data, which is great for empowering everyday people to contribute to and connect with nature. And this has led to this kind of exponential rise in observations submitted to platforms like iNaturalist. You can see this graph. This is the number of observations from 2004 to 2024. Last year there was over 30 million records, which is huge amount of data, and which, as Sophie mentioned at the start, is crucial to build that evidence base and guide decision making. An example of this in action is we have a project with Friends of the Earth, and it's a postcode gardener project. So the aim is to create more biodiverse wild city streets whilst also connecting with local communities. So we set up an iNaturalist project for this, where all the community observations are uploaded and automatically organized by site and taxon into the project based on the location of the observation. And then they can be verified by others on the platform, and we can easily access the data. And this just shows how citizen science apps can really turn local engagement into actually really meaningful and actionable data for nature restoration.
So beyond the kind of technical monitoring methods, another huge benefit is how technology enables human-wildlife connection. And many apps like the citizen science apps that Ella just covered, lowering the barrier to entry for interacting with wildlife. And a really fun, innovative example of this is the fish doorbell. So in Utrecht in the Netherlands, there's a lock which, when closed, stops fish from swimming through when they're looking for a place to spawn and reproduce. And this makes them really easy prey because they basically get stuck waiting to go through at this lock, and it wastes their energy while they're waiting to get through. And so as a fun way to fix this, they've installed an underwater camera at the kind of lock. So you can see if fish appear and they want to get through. So anyone can come onto the website, look at this live stream, and when they see, they press the doorbell online, and that alerts the physical lock keeper, who manually opens and closes that lock, who will open it to let the fish through. And amazingly, this has attracted 2.7 million viewers. So it just shows how little things like this can go a long way to bring people all over just a little closer to nature, and also spread education on something like this that people might have no idea is an issue, just a lock in a city. And then lastly, moving on to more of a, structured use of camera traps. So we touched on before one method of looking at mammal populations and occupancy data using drones. And drones are great, and they give you a really great, accurate snapshot of a population, so a point in time. But camera traps can really give us an even more robust understanding of how large mammals are using a site or spreading through an area. Camera traps can be deployed and then left for weeks or months to record, and we can capture fluctuations in large mammal numbers and build up a better picture of how they're moving through an area. And camera traps, as we've seen in the previous slide, can even give us live streaming data and updates of when animals are seen. So we deployed these camera traps at a site in Scotland to confirm the presence of a small kind of deer herd, and you can see that there, the footage, and also capture of some cattle there. That was really useful for us to just confirm the presence of kind of a small population. But a really nice case study of using camera traps and the data you get from it is this one on the bottom here from the Pamir, and looking at snow leopards. So they used a combination of camera traps as well as visual sign-based surveys, people on the ground looking for signs of these leopards to understand their distribution and what might impact that. And so you can see on this model, they created an occupancy model of where there's a high chance that snow leopards are occupying those areas, all the way through to a low chance. and they found that things like density of roads and proximity to water sources were really key to their distribution. But what was really great is that their new understanding of the distribution of these snow leopards meant that they could recommend that the protected area for them should be expanded. And without this kind of data, they wouldn't have known that these snow leopards were coming down in some of these areas, and that the protected areas should be expanded.
Nice. Moving on to the third aspect of tech in rewilding, technology is helping us to extend our senses. So tech is allowing us to see and hear and sense far beyond the human limits, which is helping us detect hidden biodiversity that we couldn't necessarily detect without technology before, and also capture this high resolution spatial and temporal data on biodiversity. So one method for extending our senses is using eDNA, or environmental DNA. So environmental DNA is the genetic material left behind by animals in soil or water or air. So basically animals shed DNA when they leave their skin cells and feces and mucus in the environment, and we can collect these environmental samples, and then the DNA can be extracted and sequenced in the lab. And one of the biggest advantages of eDNA is that it's non-invasive, so we can gather huge amounts of data and information without disturbing wildlife or habitats. This makes it an efficient and ethical and relatively cost-effective tool for monitoring ecosystems over the long term. In a rewilding context, eDNA can help us track species returning naturally or species returning through reintroductions like beavers. You could use it to monitor changes in soil biodiversity, so looking at fungal communities and small invertebrates in the soil, and also quantify broader landscape scale impacts of restoration projects and detect species that are really difficult to survey with traditional methods. For example, at Ecosulis, we used soil eDNA to baseline a rewilding site, and we compared the fungal communities from the rewilding site to a neighbouring horse pasture. And the rewilding site is the top figure. You can see the rewilding site had 157 operational taxon units, which is basically taxon richness, compared to the neighbouring horse pasture, which was 126, showing that the rewilding site had a higher taxonomic richness. eDNA is great. You get like vast amount of data, but there's not enough reference data still, I don't think, at the moment to attach that much meaning. Like, all we can say from that really is it's higher in terms of taxon richness, and maybe you could pick out some specific fungal species that are used for different functional processes. But yeah, there's still a bit of a way to go, I think, with eDNA. You can also take eDNA samples in aquatic systems like ponds, which are really cool because they basically act like DNA reservoirs, because obviously the DNA will mix with the water, meaning you probably only need one or a couple of samples, and you will capture multiple species, including maybe species that just visited the pond to drink from it. So looking ahead, eDNA is becoming more powerful. Things like portable sequencers are being developed or have been developed, so you can sequence in the field, and AI integration, as well as allowing for faster species detection and predictive modeling. So over time, as the reference data sets grow, eDNA should be more useful, because at the moment, yeah, I think you can't quite attach, especially for like fungal species, you can't attach that much meaning to it. And it should become more cost effective and time efficient tool for tracking biodiversity and guiding kind of rewilding projects. We can also use hydrophones. We've talked about bioacoustic monitoring for birds and terrestrial acoustic monitoring, but hydrophones allow us to listen to sounds in the water and soil, kind of opening up a whole new window into biodiversity that is often hidden from us. And by analysing the soundscape, you can use, they're called acoustic indices, so it's a way to quantify acoustic diversity as opposed to species diversity. And you can get really interesting insights into ecosystem health and the biodiversity from the kind of acoustic soundscape. So, for example, there's a recent study in South Yorkshire, actually, and they compared the acoustic diversity in the soil from a restored forest with a degraded, deforested area, and they compared the soil there as well. And they found that the restored soils showed a much higher acoustic diversity than the deforested soils, which was really cool. Hydrophones can also be deployed in rivers, ponds, oceans, so they're already used quite a lot in cetacean research, but now they're being used more and more in freshwater monitoring as well. Here you can see this figure at the bottom. We were testing the approach on the River Ada, and we calculated the acoustic complexity index, and you can see these clear temporal patterns. So during the day, there's an increased kind of activity in acoustic diversity, likely from aquatic plant respiration. They create like little popping sounds. And at nighttime, or like dusk and dawn, there's these two little peaks, which again might be from like aquatic insect noises. Still a few unknowns, and there's still a lot of research there to do, but it's exciting.
And although we've touched on how camera trapping and drones can be really effective for tracking mammal populations, a final example of tech towards this outcome is the use of thermal scopes. So these enable us to see what we previously couldn't see with the naked eye when going out to look for large mammals, for example. We found a really key or important aspect of collecting data on large mammals is understanding their behaviour. So, for example, at site we were looking at trying to measure deer populations. We understood that the deer liked to aggregate at the forest edge, and so planning to go up to high points and do vantage point surveys is great, looking down, over different valleys. But if those deer are hiding in the edges of forest, it's going to be really hard to see with binoculars or naked eye. And so through the use of thermal imaging, we can pick up on those individuals that we'd otherwise miss when carrying out just traditional surveys. So we've covered the kind of enormous increase in data we can collect from landscape scale drone imagery to continuous acoustic monitoring. But all of that raw data is useless unless we can efficiently process it. So the next section focuses on this kind of final and crucial area of technology. And this is where machine learning and artificial intelligence take the heavy lifting out of ecology and bring efficiencies to complement the work of experts and ecologists. And we can also make all of this data actionable to ensure that it converts into more positive impact on the ground for rewilding. So a really key automation step is turning raw sensory data, so that camera trap data or that acoustic data, into identified species. And to do this, we use sound and image classifiers. So instead of humans listening to every bird call on a recording to identify them, or looking at every observation of camera footage, we can use a model to take a first run at this and identify the species. And this will often also give you a confidence rating with each of those identifications. So then humans can go back and check where those confidence ratings might be a bit low. And this kind of combined approach of the models with the manual verification by humans is absolutely key. And to kind of echo what Ella has said before, the idea isn't to replace humans here, but to optimize their use, I guess, or optimize their time. So the key thing here is that it really dramatically increases time efficiency. And what's really exciting is these models are getting more and more clever. So we can start to identify specific individuals in a camera trap, and also identify behaviours based on variation in bird calls. So we can start to understand that whether species are just flying over or whether they're breeding on a site, or whatever it might be, how they're using that area. And this technology is now being taken a step further with vision language models. So these models can look at an image or a video and generate a natural language description of what's going on. So that's what you can see here. This image has been fed into vision language models. So think of it like a different kind of chat GPT that's been trained. And the VLM can identify the animals that are present. It can note the context and can interpret the behaviors shown. So we can see the one animal lunging at the other here. And so these VLMs can basically auto tag and contextualize these images straight away. So here it's kind of tagged confrontation or dominance as an interaction. And that gives ecologists that detailed behavioral data from this raw data instantly and really quickly. And so this is just one way that this kind of tech could be used, but could really revolutionize how we study this kind of data.
And just as machine learning can automate the classification of images and sounds and the identification of behaviors with vision models, AI can also analyze and classify habitats at landscape scales. So for the Loch Lomond National Park, we used an AI-derived data set. So it's a bear peat map produced by NatureScott from Sentinel-2 satellite imagery, and machine learning automatically identifies patches of bear peat at a 10-meter resolution. So this is a great example of how automation and data analysis, combining remote sensing and machine learning, can efficiently help us identify degraded areas and focus on our restoration interventions where they're going to have the greatest impact.
And so the crucial final step for making all of this data accessible and actionable is how we then go about communicating it, which is where dashboards come in. So data can be automatically cleaned, analysed and visualised to provide real-time insights into projects. And the key benefit of this is that you can present this really complex data that we've presented in really digestible ways, tailored depending on the audience. So whether you're an ecologist that needs to understand how your land management interventions have impacted the site, or you're a local community that wants to know what biodiversity is around you, or even a funder that wants to understand how a project they might have invested in is progressing.
And so automation in data analysis is only actually as good as the people using it, which is why upskilling ecologists is so important. At Ecosoulis, we're helping ecologists learn to use large language models and coding co-pilots to kind of streamline workflows, analyze data more efficiently and make sense of large data sets, as well as develop dashboards so we can visualize, understand and share that data. And learning to handle and interpret these complex data sets is key, but equally important is understanding how to integrate automated analyses with traditional survey methods. And this ensures that the results are not just fast, but also scientifically robust. And finally, this is, I think, quite a cool infographic. It just shows the shift in conservation technology development. So historically, most of our technologies, such as most of our technology and devices used in ecology and conservation were originally developed for other purposes. So used in the government, military or medical purposes, and then were later adopted by the conservation community. So an example of this is GPS processing units modified into wildlife tracking collars. But now we're starting to see this exciting shift. We're moving from being the current role as technology consumers, which is shown in the top as the classic model, to technology drivers and innovators, which is shown in the bottom as the alternative model. And we've explored through this presentation how technology is now essential to an ecologist toolkit. And the conservation community are now driving the creation of new technology, which is giving us access to newer, cheaper, and more specialized tech to a larger part of the ecological industry. And I mean, this has come at a crucial time really for nature and climate, providing quite a hopeful future in the face of the joint crises. And this shift will continue to open up new possibilities for rewilding, allowing us not only to monitor ecosystems, but actively guide these technology developments and actively guide and enhance ecological restoration in ways that weren't possible before. And I think that is everything from us. Yeah, thank you very much for joining this evening. Any questions?
Thank you both. I'm just getting my view correct so I can actually see us all.
Do I stop sharing?
You could leave the details up for the moment, I
Yeah,
think.
okay.
Yeah, thanks both. I never thought I'd hear the expression fish doorbell.
I had to put it in.
But yeah, there can be a view that there's a great sort of purity in nature without tech, but I think you've really brought to life how much it can help nature and the vast range of applications and progress that's really expanding that. So thank you for that. We've got 4 questions in the Q&A already. I've got a couple more here. If you'd like to ask a question to Sophie or Ella, please put them in the Q&A and I'll try and work through them as best I can. First one is about levels of accuracy. How do accuracy levels, do you believe, compare if you're counting a population of animals between drones and human surveys?
I think it depends on how you design that survey. I think that's the really key question. You could do a drone survey, which is planned terribly, and then the accuracy or the numbers that you're going to get out of it aren't going to be reflective of that population, and the same for a human survey. I think it also depends on scale over which you're doing it as well. So I think there are lots of different variables that come into planning that survey, which will then impact the accuracy. Because of course, if you're able to do a census count as well, so capturing all of the individuals at once, that can give you a higher level of accuracy than if you have to extrapolate the numbers out after a survey as well.
Thank you. Ella, did you want to add to that?
I think Sophie got it there.
No, I was mindful of your section earlier, Ella, about the overlap between acoustic bird counts, species counts, and human, and neither got all of them.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point.
It depends what you mean by accuracy, really.
Yeah.
How do you know? Anyway. In terms of the costs of the different ways of monitoring, it's going to be a tricky one to be exact about, but how expensive are the ways of monitoring and how easy are they to set up? Do they really need to be specialist things, or are some of them quite accessible?
I mean, I would say it really does depend. So things like acoustic monitoring devices have become really cost effective now. There's a brand called Audio Moth. It's pictured on the photo, the little green one. And I think they're about £50 with a case that you're probably looking at about £80 or £90, which is a lot more cost effective than, historically acoustic monitoring devices were £800, £900. So that has become more accessible, and also they're open source, so ways to analyze there's lots of options to analyze them free without having to pay for software. Again, camera traps, a couple of £100. Then things like, I guess, like LiDAR data, for example, that's strict, like flying a drone, a plane kind of drone with a laser, that's going to be really extortionate, but we don't need to do that because that data's collected quite regularly by other companies like the EA and things, so you can purchase that. So for LiDAR data, you can purchase it's Blue Sky, or Blue Sky data have LiDAR data, so you can purchase it for a certain square for, again, like, I don't know, for a small site it might only be less than £100. Trying to think of other technologies. I think it's becoming more and more cost effective. eDNA is like, it should be cost effective. It's still, like, for a single sample you're still looking at about £100 to get that analyzed. But again, I think I mentioned, like, with new technology where you can have like an insight portable kind of sequencer, these kind of technologies are going to become more cost effective. And again, the larger your site, it depends. The larger your site, the more sensors you might want out, or the bigger you've got to fly your drone or whatever. So again, it does get more expensive at scale. but the reason we're using a lot of these technologies is because they are cost effective at scale, because rewilding obviously has to happen at scale. Do you have anything to add on that, Sophie? I can't think if I've missed any technologies.
No, I think the only thing I had in my mind was about the accessibility of them in terms of deploying them. So in terms of the acoustic sensors and camera traps, we're finding that more and more landowners and land managers are, more than capable of going and deploying these and, getting the chips out of them or putting them back out, that kind of thing. So it's definitely, I think, getting more accessible in terms of getting them deployed and managing them on the ground.
And like processing the data, you can often upload it online. Like you can upload, there's, online algorithms, so you just need to upload your SD card and then they'll send you back, an Excel with all your species. So it's definitely lowering the barrier. Yeah.
I'm going to quite enjoy the next one. And for transparency, John mentioned at the start that he works with Sophy and Ella. Having helped set up Yorkshire Rewilding Network 5 years ago, I came across Ecosoulis and ended up working with them and now work with Credit Nature. So we've got a bit of a YRN Credit Nature Ecosoulis takeover this evening. But the question to ask is, do you need deep understanding of how the tech works to do your jobs, you two? Or can you focus on the science side and your company's staff people to understand the technology?
Who wants to go
As
first?
far as I'm aware, you two are the experts.
I would say from my perspective, I mean, the only technology before I joined Ecosoulis I really knew really well was biologging, because I used it in my master's. So, all the technology that I know really well now how to use, I've picked up over the last 3 or 4 years. I don't know if that's answered the question. I like the tech. Yeah, I think it is easy enough to understand or learn the technology. I've definitely self-taught a lot of it. But I think the science and the technology interlink. So I would rather do both than focus just on the science side, I guess.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think
and then any
links.
Yeah, and if there's any there's a lot of startup companies and technology companies that their whole focus is technology, and often if we are getting our acoustic data run through someone else's machine learning algorithm, they'll probably understand it better, maybe better than us. So then in that case you can speak to external companies and startups to, if there's tech you're not super confident on, someone else's.
Yeah.
Thank you. And there is a question as well about the danger that ecologists have less and less love of nature and don't get to know it because it's all tech reliant. I'm not sure that's the case with you two, because you did emphasize that the tech complements the human interaction.
Yeah,
You two find your awe for nature is becoming a bit distant and you're stuck inside and analyzing stuff, or does it just make you want to go out and find more?
I don't think so. Yeah, no, I think as we kind of said during the presentation, you still have to be completely grounded. I don't think you can apply any tech in a useful way if you're not connected to the nature that you're trying to measure. I've found with every kind of monitoring plan that we're working up that involves technology, the main questions are always around, okay, who knows the ground, who knows the nature we're working with, and really keeping it grounded. Yeah.
Thank you. Questions have been piling in, so I'll get through as many as I can. If people do need to drop off the webinar at 8:30, remember it is recorded and will be on our YouTube channel in a few days. So if you do have to go, you won't necessarily miss anything. Bit about perhaps the research bias that you mentioned. And is there a risk that that carries through into the machine learning resources? So the example quoted is BirdNet is a very comprehensive database for bird calls and songs, but are there databases for the less sexy taxa, such as invertebrates?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Yeah, the machine learning especially is only, the output of the model is only ever going to be as good as the input of the data. So for, like you said, for BirdNet, there is a lot of training data. So the model's pretty accurate, it still makes errors, which is why we both mentioned it's really crucial to have that human validation element. We're not just blindly like taking all the data out of the tech. But yeah, again, I think there are a couple of companies looking at bioacoustics of like invertebrates, especially on like agricultural sites, or they have like bioacoustic monitors specifically for invertebrates. But again, it's these taxa that are less well documented. The models aren't potentially going to be as good at the moment. That's not to say they won't be in the future. Yeah.
Okay.
Anything to add, Sophie?
No, the only thing that came to mind was that hopefully through tech we can learn more and more about those species that are less represented at the moment. Hopefully it will help speed up some of that research and be a bit of a positive feedback loop instead.
Yeah, I was hearing on Rare Earth on the radio the other day, there are now satellite tags for moths. Miniaturized enough, so that's a bit mad.
Wow.
Further question, if I may, sharing of landscape scale maps. Are there open access sources for other researchers or organisations to use them?
Yeah.
Yeah, the only one that comes to mind for me is the LiDAR for like England and Scotland. I think Scotland's maybe a bit patchier, but England is pretty comprehensive in terms of the LiDAR data.
I think if you go on like Natural England or the EA have various portals, if you just look for open government license at the bottom of the data, I can't actually think of any off the top of my head. I don't know if like Magic Maps, the DEFRA Magic Maps is open source.
This is the key bit where it would be good just to chuck it to John and go, John, man.
Yeah, John's the map man.
John knows.
Yeah, I'm coming on. Well, camera one's up. Yeah, so if anybody's actually familiar with DEFRA's Magic Map, there's a huge amount of data there. It's a different sort of spatial resolutions, but there is an awful lot of data there that you can use. Natural England tends to publish all of their data through that, for example. So if anybody's got any questions on that, feel free to give me a shout through the Yorkshire Rewilding Network, or indeed through Credit Nature, and I can at least point you to that.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Bit of a jump to a different subject matter. No fence. What species are no fence collars available for, and is there sign of it broadening into other rewilding relevant species?
It's a good question. As far as I'm aware, they only have licenses to use them on cattle, sheep, and goats, or they've only trialed them. It's all to do with that animal welfare, because I think I've had a conversation with No Fence before, and they know most animals every animal is clever and understands that kind of behavior, like that understands that kind of technology and that those audible cues and what they mean, or they would learn it. So they don't have any issues with other animals being able to understand the technology and it be effective. But it's like the animal, as far as I'm aware, it's the animal welfare side of things, and they have to go through a very complex process to get a species approved. I think, because I think I've spoken to them before about using no fence on water buffalo, but they said absolutely no, because they haven't got the licenses for them at the minute. And again, species like horses, it would be great to use them on horses, but their neck shape is a bit awkward. Like the no fence collars work really well with cattle and sheep and goats, because they've got bigger head and smaller neck, whereas the horses have got much longer neck and possibly could kind of slide off. So yeah, only cattle, sheep, and goats at the minute. I think No Fence would like to introduce other species in the future, but it's not up to users of No Fence. It's up to No Fence to govern that. Unfortunately.
Oh, that's good, thank you. There are a few other questions, but they're generally sort of variations about sharing data or using specific bits from it to other studies, costs of analysing it, so on, that you've already mentioned. building up libraries. So, for example, on eDNA, should or are traditional naturalists gathering verified specimens for addition to the library? Presumably that's just a continuous process because we won't have everything logged yet.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
And then about sort of the concern over replacement of ecological skills and career paths and so on, where again, I think you've already emphasised that it's a complementary thing rather than a replacement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
yeah.
On which note, if you would stop sharing,
Okay.
I'll just conclude
There you
with a quick shout out on behalf of YRN. That one, if I may. So, hope you've enjoyed this evening. Small donations are always welcome. There's a QR code there if you would like to use that way, or you can go via our website, or there's the text method. We're fortunate that we have a great level of support throughout the region. As one of the intro slides said, we're now above 1,500 on our mailing list, and we try and keep things accessible by making as much as we can, such as this evening, free of charge. So if those that can contribute do, it helps us with our running costs. And where we get grants, as we've been fortunate to do recently, we are currently advertising for a part-time contract role to do some of the core work of the network to allow those of us on the committee to do the fun stuff and extend the reach of the network. I'll stop sharing that and just finally again thank Ella and Sophie for giving up their evening and clearly doing a lot of preparation as the most fluid double act we've had on this series. Thank you. There was not one. Next slide, please. And the tech worked, which would have been embarrassing if it hadn't. So thank you again both for that. For the audience, it's lovely to see very many familiar names on the attendee list, but also lots of new ones. You're all very welcome. We normally like to advertise the next webinar now. Unfortunately, we haven't quite pinned down the date with our next speaker, who we're hoping will talk about the interaction between well-being and rewilding. So quite a different topic, but we do try and keep moving around. That should be late November or early December. So watch out for mail shots about that. We are also, I realise, running a networking day on the 15th of November. Details have just gone on our events page. That will be partly about meeting other rewilders to network and talk, seeing demonstrations of conservation hedge laying, which is James Wood, one of our committee, wrestling with hedging as far as I can tell. We can't sadly let people have a go because chainsaws and sharp stuff doesn't quite fit in our insurance, but it should be a great day to go along, see how they've done that on their site at Galfay near Ripon. So do get on to the events page and onto Eventbrite quickly if you want to do that, because it's limited places. And we'll have more to come through the winter. So thanks all for joining. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I'll leave the page open if you want to put any more messages in chat. But otherwise, we'll hope to see you again before long. Bye for now.